You are interested in the unusual, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
Because what we do learn about demons does fit into and explain everything from supposed experiences with ghosts to supposed experiences with aliens and every paranormal experience in between, including necromancy. So, for instance, one time Jesus is talking about when what he calls a strong man, when a spirit is exorcised from a human being, it'll go around looking for somewhere else to reside, and if it doesn't find a place, it'll come back to where it was exorcised from, and when he sees that the person is all put in order, but still obviously open to demonism, it goes out and it does what? It goes and gets demons more wicked than itself. So I'm pointing that out to say that demons have different personalities, different temperaments. I view some of them as being more like secretaries who will hang around family groups and basically take notes. And some of them are very aggressive, and they end up being called poltergeist, right? They literally lash out violently. So where the more secretarial demons who just hang around and observe, they could quite easily whisper into the ear, in a manner of speaking, of a psychic and say, hey, tell him this, because nobody else could know that was not there at the time in the privacy of that home. And then all of a sudden, you're being given over to this psychic, and this is how you end up with the popularity of psychics, which is in some sense the same kind of necromancy into which Strieber is involving himself now. And I'm saying that even granting that there's obviously a shtick when it comes to psychics, there's obviously cold reading, there's an obvious way that they go about manipulating people. There's also the tiny percentage of things they know that they really shouldn't know. And then, okay, so we talk about ghosts, and it's the same kind of thing. How could some kind of entity appear to somebody and claim, hi, I'm your deceased loved one, and I can prove it because I know this, that, and the other? Well, of course, a demon would know this, that, and the other. They've been hanging around your family. In fact, I remember hearing so many people describe that they know their deceased loved one is around them because they smell their perfume, right? Or just the scent of their body or something like that. And one time I was in a motorcycle accident and scraped quite a few layers of skin off of my knee, which ended up just atrophying, and obviously the skin rots away and then it falls off. Well, if you've ever smelled rotting human flesh, it's definitely a unique aroma. There's really nothing else like it. It's quite repulsive. It's very distinct. Well, quite some time after that was all done with, and my knee was fine and the skin was fine, I was sitting in a coffee shop just reading, hanging around, and I smelled that aroma. And I thought to myself, I seriously doubt anyone in this coffee shop has rotting flesh on them. So that's called an olfactory memory. It's rare, but it's a memory of a scent. And so you think you're smelling it, but it's really just a memory. I know in Argentina, where I was born, we make a certain dessert called panqueques con dulce de leche, okay? It's basically something with its own unique aroma that's wonderful, and that I wouldn't really smell anywhere at all unless somebody was making it. So I walked into my bedroom one day and got that distinct aroma, and I know for a fact nobody was preparing that at my house. So again, it was an olfactory memory. So anyhow, what I'm getting at is that for you or I to say that it has to do with demons isn't a sort of simplistic escape mechanism. It's actually a way to make sense of very disturbing, difficult, and complex phenomena in a way that actually makes sense. Why would these things happen? You don't just slap the word demon on it and walk away. There's a way to actually interact with the phenomena and interact with what we know about demons and notice how these things do actually coincide. Not to mention that their primary purpose would be to get you to look away from the truth. So that's why you end up with phenomena of alleged aliens getting all involved in our theology. I mean, why on another planet or universe would aliens be like, we got to travel to Earth and set these humans right about their theology?
Well, in the key, Whitley asked this master that he conjures out of nowhere at 3 a.m. in a Toronto hotel, if he was in the presence of demons that night in December 1985, and the master says something. He uses the metaphor of weight training. He says in order for the muscles to become stronger, you have to put progressively greater weights. But basically, the point is he's affirming it. He's saying to Whitley, yes, they were demons, but your demons are your friends because they're testing you and making you stronger.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that's I'm glad, you sort of qualified that when you said about when we introduced the idea of demons, it's not to close the book, it's to open a new book, is how I'd put it. Yeah?
Yes, exactly.
Because we're going to say, okay, this is demons, then we've got to begin a whole new exploration in terms of what are demons, what is that word, what did that word come into existence in order to point towards as some hidden aspect of reality. And so one of the questions, or the first question really for me, and probably the main reason why I've stayed away from putting a label like that on them, because Strieber does it. He calls them demons and then he calls them angels, and he just flip-flops back and forth. So he can't. He's trapped in this dualistic perspective where they've got to be either or, and then he tries to come up with a way to make them both and, but it's not theology. He's not going into theology or traditional metaphysics or anything like that. He's just coming up with his own new age one world religion version of it, I think, in order to reconcile the unbearable tension of the possibility that he might actually being deceived by demons and that what he thinks is benefiting him isn't. But having said all that, do you think that, because like the Muslims, for example, as far as what I know, they believe the jinn is their equivalent of demons, but that some jinn are Muslim, as they put it, as in some jinn are aligned with Allah's will. So do you think that the Christian perspective is, as it's filtered down to us anyways, might be too dualistic in the sense that demons are simply wholly associated with evil? I mean, is it possible that there's a spectrum there where these, whatever they are, inorganic or discarnate beings that mostly are involved with fucking with us, that there are cases of benign interventions from the other side?
I am so glad you stated in those particular terms, because I think that there's an aspect of demonology that pertains to the trauma that they themselves suffered. Let me take one step back and say it's also interesting you mentioned jinn, because just like Strieber initially identifying the visitors as demons, Muhammad originally interpreted what he was experiencing as being manipulated by jinns to the point that he kind of contemplated suicide.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. So yes, I mean, I don't want to get into Islamic theology because I do want to get into biblical theology, and that'll take me a little bit of time to give you my perspective on demonology. All right, bottom line is I'm writing a series of books. 2 are published so far. One is What Does the Bible Say About Angels? One is What Does the Bible Say About Demons? A separate one will just be about Satan. A separate one will be about various other paranormal entities. So all that just to say, I'd like to give you a very quick rundown. Anyone who wants details can look at the books, but I don't want to bore you or your audience with a whole bunch of quotations and citations, right? So,
okay, yeah.
So if you don't mind, I'll give you a very quick rundown of the issue of angels and demons.
Okay.
Okay, now, when we talk about the Bible, we need to think in terms of what is it and what is it not. Okay, it is not a textbook on angelology or demonology. And so whatever it tells us about those subjects is just like pieces of a puzzle. And the text is not intended to put that puzzle together for us, because the puzzle the Bible's putting together for us is anthropological, not angelology, not demonology. So it focuses on us. It focuses on our relationship with God. It's how it was damaged and how to restore it. So this is why you end up with various different ideas about angels and demons, is because we're putting together pieces of a puzzle. Now, generally people say that demons are fallen angels, or that demons are not fallen angels. Okay, if they're not fallen angels, then what are they? And the reason why people would want to distinguish fallen angels from demons is because angels and demons exhibit different characteristics. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I start talking about angels, I'll go down a rabbit hole, so I don't want to do that. But that's just a basic fact. They exhibit different characteristics. Mm-hmm. And so the more preferable option is, fallen angels. I mean, demons are not fallen angels, but then that brings you to the difficulty of what are they, because demons seem to just kind of suddenly appear in the text without any elucidating background. So the better option that does give you some background is that demons are fallen angels. But then how do they exhibit different characteristics? So I'm going to give you my own personal perspective on it, and I hope you don't mind. And believe me, it makes me pretty nervous to say that I have my own perspective on it, because I know a whole lot of people would come up with a theological niche, so just to sort of stake their ground and claim that they have some kind of unique view no one else does, and now I can build a quote-unquote ministry on it and this and that and the other. And that's definitely not the kind of guy that I am.
Okay.
Okay, so with all that as a preface, essentially in Genesis 6 we have a description of quote-unquote sons of God who marry quote-unquote daughters of men, and they have children with them. And this is at least a part of the preface of the setup for the catastrophe of the flood. Okay. So later on, Jude and Peter will both comment on angels who Jude says left their first estate in order to do what? And both Jude and Peter tell us that they did very much like Sodom and Gomorrah, which is that they went after strange flesh. In other words, they were interacting carnally as they should not have. And so the picture that emerges is that angels copulated with human women and birthed offspring, and that was essentially all dealt with by the flood. So let's move forward a little bit, because Jude tells us that these fallen angels were incarcerated. Peter uses the specific word Tartarus, which only appears that one time in the whole Bible, and I think he was playing to his Greek audience, and that they would understand, oh yes, the Greek mythology tells us the same kind of thing. Okay. And so it turns out that the place of the incarceration is also called the abyss, and abyss means bottomless pit. So that's where you get this imagery of an incarceration. Now, you have a scenario in Revelation 9 where the bottomless pit is opened up, and out of there emerges beings that are very strangely described. You know, they have faces like men, they have hair like women, they're like locusts, they have armor on. They have tails like scorpions and so on and so forth. And to me, it was not very difficult to see that what that is telling us is that someday those fallen angels will be released. And those weird descriptions are actually symbolism that you can explain from other portions of the Bible quite simply, that they're locusts means that they're a vast number who destroy things. I mean, obviously, locusts can swarm and destroy a field and such. Faces like men, obviously, they have the intellect of human beings. Hair like women means that they're under authority. Tails like scorpions to inflict pain. Jesus had made reference to scorpions and serpents within the context of satanic powers. So everything can be explained. So you don't have to think that these are just strange descriptions of helicopters or or some kind of a chimera, you know. So in other words, these are the fallen angels released from the bottomless pit. And what do? Well, they wreak havoc upon the earth. And then what? Well, then we don't know, except then you get to Revelation 12, which tells us that at some point, fallen angels join with Satan to fight a war against Michael and loyal angels, where they get their rear ends beaten up badly enough that that's the last you hear of them. So in other words, they sinned, they were incarcerated, they're released to perform certain destructive acts, then they fight against Michael and his angels, and they're defeated. So in the meantime, where are demons? Well, where my own theory comes into play is that it seems to me, and again, I lay this out in detail in the books, is that the bodies of the angels were incarcerated, but their spirits remained on earth, and they roam around, and that's what's demons. Okay, now, some of the benefits of that view is that I could lay it out from Scripture, and I do. And it also explains some characteristics and why they're different, demons from fallen angels. So, for example, why do demons seek to possess human beings? Well, because they were once incarnated. They once had their own bodies, and they seek that which they once had. They want to be re-embodied. Also, why do they seek to be worshipped in the form of an idol? Again, they want to see themselves represented as a body, which is what they once had and they once lost. And so there's also a lot of times when Jesus is exorcising demons, they say, don't send us into the abyss. I mean, they're absolutely terrified of being sent into the abyss. Well, why? Because that would mean that they would re-inhabit their bodies, and now they're stuck there. They're doing hard time, right? They're doing concentration curls. They're getting fights in the exercise yard. Obviously, I'm kidding about that, but it makes a lot of sense as to why they do the things they do and why they say the things that they say and why they are different than fallen angels. So basically, you're looking at them undergoing a traumatic event, which was being judged for falling and then being separated from their bodies. And so that's why the beings that we specifically call demons would be malevolent as opposed to loyal angels who would have very different characteristics. And then when you look at even the most wild space opera like L. Ron Hubbard's, he's telling us a very similar story. He doesn't call it the abyss, he calls it a volcano. But he's describing an event where the spirits are separated from their bodies, and they're so traumatized that they seek to re-inhabit a body. It's really strange how even in someone as out there in sci-fi land as Hubbard ends up touching upon something that certainly appears to me to be relating truth.
So is there room in the Christian interpretation that you've just outlaid for the Muslim jinn?
Well, again, I think you rightly noted that there's the view of jinn who are malevolent and some benevolent. I would say that it's not that some demons are helpful and some aren't. It's that the demons were so traumatized by what they experienced that they do certainly have a one-track mind. It's just a matter of how they act out, whether they're more just under the auspices of Satan and they're more like his secretaries, or whether they're more like the berserkers and they literally act out violently in whatever way they could manage to.
But neither of those would be benevolent.
No.
So there isn't a space for benevolent.
Not in the demon category. You would have to look for benevolence in the category of angels.
But I don't think that corresponds with jinn, does it?
Not necessarily. Again, it is easy to on the surface level, it's very easy to say, oh, yeah, it's the same basic idea. Jinns are demons. Yeah, that's what they are. It's very simple to say that. But when you get into the actual theology, it would be considerably more difficult to say that they're describing the same things. And that's why you end up with problems like Strieber saying...
Well, there's even the Meister Eckhart thing that was in that movie Jacob's Ladder. Did you see that?
Yes.
So at the end, the chiropractor played by Danny Aiello, who's really an angel, explains to Jake, who's dead but doesn't know it, that what seems like demons tearing her life away are really angels setting him free. In other words, it's all in his point of view.
Right.
And that was Eckhart, who's Christian. So seems as though there are I don't know, there are non-dualistic perspectives that aren't one world religion Luciferian counterfeits. I think there's a genuine way to see this in a non-dualistic way, but there's also a counterfeit, and I think that Strieber's partaken of the counterfeit, and he's been selling the counterfeit. That's
right.
what I would say. And it occurred to me while you were talking earlier, when you were talking about how you became aware of the possibility of redemption, the possibility of a Redeemer and of Christ the Messiah by seeking a necessary context for the trauma, something that would make the trauma meaningful. And what you described there, as I see it anyway, based on my own life experience, which is, I'd say, taken a similar course and led me to similar acceptances, is that's the surrender position that you're describing there. The recognition that the world is full of evil and pain and suffering that we can't control or understand, and we are subject to it, but there is something greater than us that can make sense of it all, and if we surrender ourselves to that, then we are redeemed, we're delivered, to the extent that we are. Anyway, that's my version. And the insight I had while you were talking was that trauma genesis, as I call it, the traumatic secret that Kripal refers to, is the counterfeit of that, or rather it may relate to people, to human beings who are confronted with trauma, and likewise they cannot bear the possibility that the trauma would be meaningless, because that makes it too unbearable. But rather than being willing to surrender to something greater, they have to find a way to make the trauma meaningful. So that rather than surrendering, they want to take charge of the trauma. And so then you have this idea that's hatched by the cunning of the human ego intellect of trauma genesis. Oh, well, we'll use trauma to engineer our own cities, our own psychism, our own, could say demonic powers even. And that seems to be very much what Strieber's embodying, what Kripal is advocating, what so much of our culture, what Crowley, MK Ultra is all about, is the opposite to the surrender position, the position of the will to power, which can't bear the reality of trauma and therefore has to somehow exploit its own trauma. And it seems as though that probably also pertains to demons. Is that what makes demons demons is they won't surrender, they reject the Redeemer.
Right. Right, because one thing I've done for many, many, many years is interact with atheists. And they often talk about, oh, why would a God send me to hell for not believing in him? And I always point out to them, that is not really the primary issue, is belief, because the Bible specifies that demons believe and tremble.
Yeah.
Right? So their issue is not lack of belief.
Yeah.
They know with 100% certainty that God exists. That's not their issue.
Yeah. Right.
And in fact, now that I have atheism on my mind, so one thing that seems that a cogent worldview would have to incorporate is humanity's propensity for horrendous acts of pure evil and also beautiful acts of pure love. You would have to be able to explain both of those in order to have any kind of cogent worldview, and anyone that does not interact with and incorporate and explain both would obviously just be lacking. And so that is one benefit we have in the biblical tale of a perfect creation that then undergoes a fall and then is eventually redeemed. So one thing I've discussed with many, many atheists is, well, when you complain about the problem of evil, on your atheistic worldview, you don't even have the right to complain about it, because you have no premise upon which to condemn anything at all. And what I mean is, if no one caused nothing to explode for no reason and made everything without meaning, okay, our universe, and if life accidentally came from non-life, and if we're nothing but temporarily and accidentally existing organisms, then how could you say it's wrong for one organism to do something to another organism that the other organism interprets as being unpleasant? Mm-hmm. Which means that they're interpreting biochemical neural reactions within their brain. I mean, how do you get from that to an absolute ethic where you think that you have the right to condemn? And so in atheism, what happens is, on the surface, it makes me want to say that evil, suffering, and pain is for nothing, obviously. But it's worse than that. On atheism, evil, pain, and suffering becomes good. Because why? Well, because it benefits our evolution. And so it rids us of the weak. It benefits the strong. And so evil, pain, and suffering become good, right? So, and now, well, for instance, okay, I'll give you the example of Darwin complaining about a particular species of wasp that lays its egg and in a living organism, and then the wasp the wasp's young eats its way out of the organism while it's still alive, and how horrible that is. But then if there's no God, if we live in an atheistic universe, then it just is. It plain and simple biological fact, and then it's no longer evil. It's not wrong. It's not bad. It's just a fact. It just is, and that's all. Like Bertrand Russell said about the universe. It just is, and that's all.
So that's a conundrum for the intellect, because if there is a God, then God created that wasp and that whole scenario of nature, which seems to us so awful and appalling.
Okay, if there is a God, it is not the case that God created that wasp in that scenario. It's that his original creation underwent a fall, and it became that, and that will eventually be redeemed. Okay, so in other words, that's why I mentioned the worldview that has to account for good and evil, is because the original creation would not have been a wasp that did that. It would have been some sort of insect that came front-loaded with enough genetic information to eventually become various of what we would call species of wasps. And due to genetic degradation, devolution, it would end up being a wasp that had to do that to survive. Right. And so that would not have been part of the original intention of God. Not to mention, I did read a rebuttal to that idea by Darwin, which pointed out that it is a fact that the wasp doing that is actually beneficial to agriculture because it destroys this certain kind of, I don't remember if they were beetles or what, that the wasp injects its eggs into. But that's actually a benefit to us because it reduces the number of these insects that would otherwise be destroyed. But that's just a part of the picture. So no, the biblical theology would claim that that scenario is part of the corruption. The fall.
It could also be that it's our human perspective and projection onto that's the fall, couldn't it? Because it could be that nature is like that, and that what appears to us as nightmarish suffering is simply our human-centric projection onto it.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that, because once